Hello, welcome to Convergent Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. On this episode, I am very honored, very privileged to bring the conversation I had with Rosemary Grant. Rosemary is an evolutionary biologist and Emeritus Professor at Princeton University. Her research has focused on phenotypic variation and the process of speciation in natural environments. She is well known for the research that she's done with her husband, Peter Grant, on Darwin's Finches on the Galapagos Islands, which they did a lot of wonderful research for over 40 years. She's a fellow at the Royal Society and has received many awards for her research. She is the author of numerous books, including her recent memoir, 1 Step Sideways, 3 Steps Forward, One Woman's Path to Becoming a Biologist. And that's what we talk about in the conversation. We start by talking about her overview of her life, what she's most proud of. We talk about her childhood, being raised in England during World War II, how she began an interest in genetics, talk about some of the research that she had done and some of her education. We talk about her moving to Canada, meeting her husband. We talk about how she balanced raising a family and her career, her work over 40 years in the Galapagos Islands, and some of her research that she did specifically within genetics. I think the wonderful thing about her research is that they were both able to observe evolutionary change with certain events that were able to happen on the islands and see the differences. And it's just it's a wonderful feat, wonderful study that they were doing for so many decades to really see that. We talk about retirement and how she continues to do research in retirement, what her legacy is, what she wants to be remembered for, and many other topics. Rosemary is a giant in the field of biology. She's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful person, very, very kind, absolutely brilliant. I really was honored to talk with her, and we had such a lovely conversation. And she's one of those people I could have talked to for hours and hours and hours, and just soaked up all of her wisdom. So she really was a delight. As always, you can find this conversation and all other conversations at convergingdialogues.substack.com. So get over there, like, follow, subscribe, share with your friends, contribute all the wonderful things. I'm very, very happy to see people interacting on there. And I'm also on YouTube. And make sure you support her work as well. And so now I bring you Rosemary Grant. I'm here with Rosemary Grant. Rosemary, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, for talking with me. I'm greatly looking forward to talking with you about your life and your work, and so it's a big honor. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, and it's an honor for me to be talking with you as well. I have heard some of your podcasts, and they're terrific. So thank you.
You're very kind. That means a lot. Thank you. It's very, very kind of you. So you've written a memoir. This is out through the wonderful Princeton University Press. The memoir is called 1 Step Sideways, 3 Steps Forward, One Woman's Path to Becoming a Biologist. And so some folks might know your work, especially your book, 40 Years of Evolution, Darwin's Finches on Daphne Major Island, and some of the other contributions you've made. So we'll get all into it. But before we do, why don't you just tell listeners kind of the snapshot of who you are. Obviously, we'll talk about your life and your life's work, but just how do you usually describe yourself nowadays, professionally or academically? I know you're kind of in retirement now, but how do you usually go about describing yourself?
So I'd say I was an evolutionary biologist. I have retired from Princeton, from teaching, but not retired from doing research. I still do research in collaboration, not only with Peter, my husband, but also with a genetics group in Sweden and several geneticists around the world. So I'm still doing research at that level in collaboration with other people.
I guess the question I have is on that is why keep going? I know you're
because I love it.
Yeah,
I wish I had many lives.
You're such an inspiration. I sometimes tell people I'm not afraid of dying. I'm just afraid of not enough time to just do so many things and research so many things. Yeah, but I mean, you've done, really a whole lifetime of work, and don't you feel you want to kick up your feet a little bit and just, kind of watch the sunset or the sunrise, all that stuff? Or I guess what keeps you going? I believe you're in your 80s now, yeah. So
I'm 87. Yes.
yes, I mean, that's quite a life. What keeps you going to do research and to keep exploring and find new things still?
I think it's questions. It's also interacting. We're very lucky because we still have offices at the university, even though we're long since retired.
Mm,
But we interact a lot with young people, and we're interacting with young people as our collaborators. And there are just so many questions that we still, both Peter and I, would still like to explore and answer. There are many, many more questions than our lifetime. So yes, so I
yeah.
think, and also interacting with young people does.
Mm, mm. That's it's a great example for myself and hopefully for listeners. Is very inspiring to be later in life and still asking good questions. That's really nice to hear. So I guess the kind of general question I have here is you've done so many things for science and biology and genetics and evolution, and we'll talk about some of that. But I guess for you, what is the thing I guess that you're most proud of, either personally or professionally or both, if they're different? When you look back on your life, I mean, usually when people write memoirs, it's usually at certain critical points or usually at the end of their life or towards the end of their life. Um, yeah, what is you've accomplished a lot, and so
Well,
what is it you're most satisfied about?
Well, I'm most happy when I hear that I have influenced some young people, where they said that I have inspired them to follow their own passion, their own, that is what has always been, even when I was younger and teaching. If somebody says that, I can't think of any higher praise. It's really a very nice feeling to know that I've also helped other people somehow, and that is the big the thing that I most value. I think
Mm,
is that I have maybe inspired some people. If you just inspire a few to do what they want, to follow their passion, then that is really terrific. Yeah.
mm. Where do you think that comes from? So you talk about this, obviously your life, and you talk about your early life. You were born during World War II in England, and you talk about your dad. I believe he was a medical doctor. Is this right? And being in a household of kind of medicine and all that. And do you feel a lot of this spirit of wanting to have impact on young people or to help them answer certain questions? Do you think there is some of your dad coming out there, or just how you were raised? What's the kind of
I
things
think
about your personality that animate that?
Yeah, I think my early childhood, as many people would say the same, I think, was very highly influenced by my environment. It was a tiny village. There were very few people there. And my father was the family doctor for the whole area. And it was at a time, well, I was born before the war, and it was so yes, so both my parents, my mother was very interested in biology and knew all the plants, knew all the animals and all the ways, and both of them were um, very aware that we had to value the people around us. I mean, many people around us had never been to school. But nevertheless, they were very knowledgeable and they had um, their own values. And we definitely, it was instilled in us that we had to value these people.
Mm,
And so that was part of that, I think. And then also growing up in the war was quite traumatic. I mean, you wondered, why were people wanting to kill you?
mm, mm,
And it was terrifying when bombs were, you could hear the planes going over and being, well, in some cases thrown under the kitchen table to protect you, that sort of thing. And then living with I think just growing up in that environment was very well, frightening in some ways, but very inspirational in other ways.
You're, you never really, I don't know if people think about it, but when people think about their own children, I don't know if they think about how long their children will live or the kind of life they'll have, but I don't know if your parents were, or I guess were here now, right? And they saw you at the age you are and the things you've had and the accomplishments you had. What do you what do you think they would say? How do you think they would feel? I'm assuming some sense of pride about how successful you've been professionally and personally. But what do you think they would say about your life and what you've done?
I think they would be very happy. I went through this time when they didn't want me to go on. They thought that this was fine for the boys, my two brothers, but not for me. I should be more of a housewife and get married. And so this was always a little bit of a problem. And it was only by saying to my father, look, I'd rather do biology than get married, that he would. I eventually managed to persuade him to let me take the university exams to go to university. So it was, I think he would be amused, I think. Whereas my mother would say would be, I think it would be the sort of thing she would have always wanted to do herself. So she used to say to me that she would really love to have been a medical doctor, was her, or even a historian. She was very interested in history, and she was also very musical. So she would have liked a career of her own. So I think she would have been extremely happy. I think my father would have been a bit amused.
Well, that's very, very nice.
It's a different world. Yeah.
Yeah. It is very much a different world. It's very, I mean, obviously, you growing up in the 20th century, I mean, there was so many crazy changes decade to decade. So yeah, it's quite the time to have all those changes. I guess, you get to, you're talking about your early life being very, kind of where you grew up and in your surroundings and things like that, very influenced by the natural world and sort of these questions that arose. But you go to University of Edinburgh and you get involved in or start to take interest in genetics there. And so I can't quite recall what years you were in Edinburgh, and so I'm trying to align that with what we know about genetics during the particular decade. But genetics has been a kind of burgeoning and new field for every decade. There's some new advancement that takes place. So I'm imagining that at the time, this was very, very new. This was like brand new. Like this was something that people were really, really getting their teeth sunk into. What made you take interest in it? Was it the newness of it, or did you see the power of what it could be for evolution?
It was a power, I think. It was not so much the newness. I mean, it was very new because it was Watson and Cricket really only worked out the not very long before, and even the genetic code. It was literally when it came out in the news. It was literally our wedding day, which was 1960.
Wow.
So, but what it was is I was interested in variation. Well, the thing that really turned me on was finding fossils. I lived in this area where it was Carboniferous limestone, just packed with fossils of there were fossil corals, fossil shells, and they looked, well, of course, the corals were completely different. I mean, why were the corals in the north of England? But the others, the gastropods, the shells, look similar to the shells that you could find round about. The fossils in the coal was very similar to the ferns that were growing in the garden. But then my mother explained that they were once giant trees that lived years ago. So I was fascinated about how and why these changes had occurred.
Mm.
And then with her, and we had a gardener, Jerry Swindlehurst, Jeremiah Swindlehurst was his name, wonderful name. And he had never been to school, but he taught himself to read and write. And he was just a fund of knowledge. And I would ask him questions about variation. And he would say, well, it all depends where you grow. You can grow an onion here in the sun and grow an onion there in the shade, and they'll look very different plants. And it was a meeting, I think when I was a teenager, I met Douglas Faulkner, who was, and that was my first introduction to genetic variation, where he was talking about there must be underlying genetic variation. And my father had also talked about this as well. So that's what made me, I thought that genetics must be the foundation of understanding how and why this change occurred. And Edinburgh University was the place where more of this was happening than anywhere else. And also, it was slightly different from genetics done in Oxford and Cambridge, where they were more thinking of there was one gene for one character. But in Edinburgh, they were thinking of the effect of the environment on the organism more. And that's why I wanted to go there. And then in my third year, Conrad Waddington and Douglas Faulkner, Waddington was the professor or the head of department, and Faulkner was a professor as well. And they started this quantitative genetics course, which was for 12 people, 6 from the rest of the world and 6 from the UK. I never thought I'd get in, but I applied, and luckily enough, I got in. They just had one question for me. Why do you want to do this? It will take a whole year of your life, and it's going to be difficult. and I just said, well, I thought it was fundamental to the things that I was interested in, the changes that occurred. And so they took me. But it was, and actually that course was absolutely fundamental to everything I've done ever since. It was a fantastic course. And it was mostly discussion, reading papers, quite different from, a normal course. And as I say, it was literally 1 year where you did nothing but that.
Wow.
It was absolutely amazing. Yeah.
What is it, I guess, about, in general, this is sort of kind of the story of evolution, but I guess specifically, right? Your question about change, or, maybe more specifically variation,
Yes.
and the genetic underpinnings. Why was that interesting for you, I guess? Did you see that in yourself, in humans, and then wanting to see it in all organisms, or what the environment's impact was on change? I guess what was the driving passion, I guess, for this particular question at the time?
Well, I think the driving passion was originally the fossils, but I remember discussing it strongly with my father, who was saying, yes, every individual is different. I have to take this into consideration when I'm treating people and prescribing a drug. Everybody's going to react to this differently. We had a lot of discussion at home about variation. It was almost a game in that my brothers and I looked very different. We had very different personalities. And so we used to wonder if there was another sibling, what they would be like. So that was a sort of fun game. But I think there was just the general discussion of, it's hard to think back, but how variation was really important. And then the knowledge that it was genetic. Well, in Edinburgh, it was the interaction between genes and the environment, and how this how change occurred. So one of the things which I do mention is, and then the knowledge of genetics, and I did this very small thing with amoeba, but the thing that I was passionate about was trying to work out how change had occurred so rapidly in the fish in Iceland, in the char in Iceland, where within the last 10,000 years, there had been char had become landlocked and changed into benthic form, netic forms, and all these sort of forms. So knowing it was so recent, I thought, maybe we could understand why this change had occurred.
Yeah. It's interesting. You were talking about, you talk about different places in the book. And I've been lucky enough to go to a lot of those places you talk about. So it was really cool for me to read your book and read the stories you have and be like, oh yeah. So you have early on this kind of, this decision, right? Of, you really wanted to go to Iceland.
Yeah.
And for anyone that's been to Iceland, it's a pretty magical place. It feels like, you can drive 1 hour and it looks like a completely different place. I mean, they almost look like other planets of sorts. Like it's amazing. It's an amazing island. It's quite marvelous. And yeah, I guess there's the char there in Iceland. But were there other reasons you wanted to go to Iceland? Obviously this study, but did you like the environment?
I got to know a lot of people in Edinburgh because in Iceland in those days they didn't have a medical school in Reykjavik. They do now, and a very good one. But then they didn't. So a lot of people came to Edinburgh. Also, in those days, in Iceland, there were very few schools, and people were homeschooled a lot. And so I somehow met a lot of friends when I was in Edinburgh who were Icelandic. I think that's probably where I got my first interest about the char. But I also was fascinated with a lot of the sagas, and as a fun, I would read the sagas and the fact that in the sagas that women were really quite important in the sagas. So that was that I think was one of the reasons that I became very interested in Iceland.
Let me ask you something. What do you think about this? So I was in Edinburgh not that long ago, and I was able to get up to the Highlands, the Scottish Highlands, and even to the Isle of Skye, which is quite gorgeous. And there's a lot of elements of that part of Scotland that reminds me of Iceland, sort of the mountains and the terrain and the weather, and it's quite beautiful. And as I'm thinking about this, I wonder if there's some of that too, right? Like Edinburgh is a very nice city. It's very very nice. And I wonder if there's a kind of sort of a similarity there of like, yes, it's very northern. It's similar type of weather. It's, if you get on into the islands in the north, they start to feel very similar to Iceland. Of course, Iceland's different in its own ways, but maybe there was some familiarity about it for you.
Oh, it was. And also, it's not just the north of Scotland, which I absolutely agree with you, is very similar to Iceland, but so are parts of the Lake District where I grew up. And also there was the Lake District sheep, they're the Herdwick sheep. So they are very closely related to the Icelandic sheep. And the people who originally came to the northwest of England with the sheep were from Iceland. So a lot of the or were Nordic, the same sort of Nordic stock. And so many of the words in the villages and the names of places and in the villages were the same language. So the way of, I don't know how they count sheep in Iceland, but there's a whole idea of, which is exactly the same with the herding of the sheep. The sheep don't really need herding. They imprint on the fell that they go up in, so they will always stay there. And the only time you have to herd them is to come down when they come down in the wintertime, and you need dogs for that. So this, and the idea that they had common ground, so the farmers would work out, how many sheep they could put up on the fell. So there's a lot of cooperation there, and that was brought to the Lake District when they first arrived about 900, I think. So for 1,000 years, they've been doing this in the Lake District in exactly the same way they do it in Iceland and in the Nordic countries or in Norway. So the whole idea of cooperation and also many of the ideas were also Icelandic. So I felt immediately when I met my Icelandic friends that there was a common bond, in the way we had been brought up.
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah, it's nice to see the continuity there, and it is interesting to see similarities with different types of people in different places that are kind of nearby. It's very, very interesting. You end up not going to Iceland, and you go to Canada. I think it's Western Canada.
Yes, to Vancouver. Yes.
And I'm going to assume that you've been to Iceland since, but at that time was super pivotal because this is where you meet your husband and your partner in crime, your life partner in crime, your professional partner in crime, which is it's a pretty special story. I mean, I think for people that know about you and your work, they know you kind of get a 2-for-1 deal. It's you and your husband, or it's right. You guys do your own thing, but you guys have been doing work together, which is really, really, really special. I guess just tell us, just generally your impressions of Western Canada when you first get there, but how your first impressions of your husband and you guys were, kind of swimming in the same pond of sorts or nearby ponds in terms of, questions you were asking and things like that. So how did it come together, I guess, that it was like, this is the person I want to be with? Was it because of the professional stuff, or was it just his charm and charisma, or what was it, I guess, all those years ago that kind of put it there for you?
I think our initial, well, Peter has also written his autobiography, and he has a rather funny story to tell about this. And of course, I have a different story to tell as well. But actually, it was the last thing I wanted to do was to meet an Englishman and fall in love with him. I wanted to be 1 year in Canada, doing all these things, going back and doing my PhD on Cha. And it was really, he was the first person that I had met who had the same questions that I did and was wanting to find out which is the process of speciation, how did speciation initially occur and that sort of thing. And I came from very much a genetic background and thinking about variation, genetic variation, and interacting with the environment. And Peter much more from an ecological side. He'd done ecology training in Cambridge and was actually starting his PhD at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And so he was actually well on his way not well on his way, just arrived. And I think we arrived within the same week as each other. But he knew exactly what his PhD was going to be and did it. And was doing it. And it was very quickly, rapidly, conversations along those lines that we realized that, wow, we have exactly the same interests. And it was the first person I had met who had really exactly that interest. And I think I was the first person Peter had met who had the same questions. So it was a meeting of minds in a way. Of course, we were young as well. We were 23, and we were doing lots of fun, like skiing together and exploring the British Columbia mountains. We both loved doing that. And so it was very much a meeting of minds. We both loved classical music. There were many things that we liked together. And I think that was basically it. Yeah. So we were lucky in that respect. Yeah.
The thing I'm thinking about here is that I think this story is maybe similar in terms of like, oh yeah, people find things that they have a meeting of minds, common interest. But I think if people think about it, this was in the 60s, yeah?
Yes. Early 60s, yes.
There probably wasn't a lot of people that were having the same kinds of ideas about things or the same questions in a very specific field or domain, and to find probably many women that were thinking about these very same questions. And so I think it's the specificity probably of like, wow, I haven't met anybody that's thinking about this. I certainly haven't met many women that are thinking about this. Whoa,
Yeah.
this is pretty special, right? And then it's like, okay, like, there is that kind of maybe symbiotic nature to it, right? Where it's like, yeah, this person gets me, and I get this person, but I think it's the like specificity of what you guys were connecting on is probably what makes it so special now.
I think so. I mean, I think that's what really attracted me to Peter, because I really wasn't wanting to get involved with anybody. And I don't think he was either. So it was a bit, yes, it was. And then just finding that we had so many things in common as well. And it was fun being together, and we had lots of young friends. And yeah, it was very, the usual thing with young people.
Sure.
Yeah, yes.
So how do you, I guess the question I have, and I think this is probably something that um, a lot of women have probably had to address or think about, is, so spoiler for people that don't know, you guys get married and you're together and you have kids and grandkids and everything, but you decide to get married, you can do these things, but you decide to, or you feel like you have to make this decision to kind of figure out what you want to do with your career, right? Because obviously if you're starting a family and all these things, there are certain sacrifices that are, especially of the time.
Yes.
How was that for you? Like, what was the conversation like between you and Peter of saying, we're going to focus on me and we'll do yours, but not yet? And how did that because that could be a pretty contentious conversation. Like, how did that happen?
Yes, it was many conversations. I know it was when to have children, and of course, with the biological clock runs for women and run out.
Right.
And we so lots of conversations. I wanted to wait till after I got my PhD initially.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, I think we had come across one or two people who had an unfortunate children with having children late and had problems with children being having difficulties, and that influenced us. And so the idea, after a lot of discussion, was, well, maybe we should have children early, with the idea of when the children went to school, then I would be able to get back and do my own PhD. So that was the sort of, it was a very difficult decision, and especially for me, because we were out of whack then. I was actually earning most of the money to put Peter through his PhD, because he wasn't, not being Canadian, he wasn't eligible in those days for grants and things like that for PhD. He got a little bit of money through teaching, but not very much, and so we were mostly relying on my salary, and I took 2 jobs at that time. So that went on, and then when we got to everything was fine, and we went to Peter did a postdoc at Yale, and we went to Yale. It was easy for me to get a job, and our first child was born then at the end of that. But when we got to Montreal, there was all of a sudden, that was difficult. There we were with a very young baby, just a few months old, a few weeks old. And so there was really nothing. There was no, basically I had to stay at home and look after Nicola. And this was difficult. And we worked it out that well, of course, I loved doing that, but it was it was difficult in thinking, how will I eventually get back into doing a PhD? And what happened is that we decided to have a babysitter. We didn't have much money. We decided to have a babysitter on Mondays. And Mondays I wouldn't do for anything else, but Monday morning I would spend in the university library. And fortunately, the university library was wonderful. The people there were very sort of welcomed me with open arms. And it got to be called Rosemary's Monday. And so I did that. And then we had our second child, a daughter, was born in Montreal. And so that was fine. There was no babysitting care. There was also a nepotism law at that time in McGill. There's not now. In fact, it's exactly the reverse. But there, I couldn't have even worked or done anything in the same department as Peter. So really, basically, I stayed at home, and I looked after the children, but I did have this Monday morning when I could keep up with science, and that was terrific. I mean, that enabled me to eventually get back.
Well, it was
really... a very different time in those.
Yeah. It definitely was different. It's incredible though, the sacrifice you make for, your family and your kids and your husband but still not. It's a detour for your career, but it wasn't a dead end for it. In fact, the opposite. So
yes, yes, it was a detour, but in some ways, I don't. Well, now looking back, I don't regret it, and then also there was this other detour on, well, things got difficult, and so even after the children had started school, so the only way I could get around that was to actually take a teacher's training course and do school teaching, and then. But even though at the time I didn't want to do it, I'm so glad I did, because I learned so much about the Finnish education system, which I'd never have learned about if I hadn't done that. Also, again, interacting with young children. And so that gave me an insight into what it was like when our children got a bit older. So well, yes, there were difficulties, but also there were rewards. And I think this is what I try and impress on younger people, that if they can't do it a straightforward path, as many people can't now, in some ways it's more difficult for people now, and not just women, but other people who've had difficulties. And just to say, well, it doesn't have to be a straight path. You can deviate from your path, and if you just throw yourself into it, you will find that you learn things that when you do come back, it will be better. You will have. I mean, I'm sure by doing this detour, I was a better teacher when I eventually came back. Yeah. So those things.
I tell this to people all the time. You sit at the base of the mountain, and you see the path that goes straight up to the summit, to the peak. And then there's another path that's like really windy, and it takes you all the way around, and it zigzags here and there. And normally we start out on the path that's very just straight up the top. And for whatever reason, things happen and we end up on the other path, but we still get there. And usually people are better for it, right? And it's the process that's so much better than if you just do kind of the straightforward way. And I think for most people that is true. But, I think everybody has different resiliency levels. And so obviously you're very resilient and determined, which is, kind of a credit to your, personality and your character. So, I mean, it takes a lot of will to keep at it, even when you have, various ways of doing things in life. So it's incredible. So one thing, so let's talk about this. So you finally, I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. You finally get to the Galapagos Islands. I've been to the Galapagos Islands. They're magnificent. They're really beautiful. I probably haven't been to as many as you've been. I've been to 2 islands. But you is it right that you spent over 40 years every year for months at a time
Yes.
on those islands? And it's again, that's I mean, just I want that gig. I want to figure out how I can get my day job so I can do that. Right? It's just so much fun. It sounds incredible. Um, yeah. How did that happen? And did you plan to do it that way? And yeah, maybe just talk shop a little bit. Tell us about your work on speciation and studying, you know, pretty much the biggest thing Darwin saw. You know, the Finches was like the starting point in a lot of ways for his ideas, and of course for evolution as we know it now. Yeah, just tell us about how you got there and some of your work that you did for 40 plus years.
Okay, well, how we got there was, well, both of us were trying to think of a place. Both Darwin and Wallace had suggested that to actually look at evolution in action, it would be good to take a situation where there was what is called an adaptive radiation, which is where a situation where there are several species that have evolved from a single common ancestor. And there are many like this. Well, the char was one group, but there are hebes, plants in New Zealand, where I think there are 90 different species, all evolved from one. And so we could have chosen any. But the Darwin's finches had what I think of as, what we both think of as three things going for them. One was that it was a young radiation, which fitted that. We now know that now we count 17 species, had all evolved in the last million years, which is quite young, and some of them in the last few thousand years. They are also in a pristine environment. There are many of the species that occur together and separately on different islands in the Galapagos. And many of these islands are completely uninhabited. So any changes that we measured would be completely natural and not affected by human intervention. So if we were careful of which islands we chose, which we were. And then the third very important ingredient was that the Galapagos lie on the equator, and as such, they're subject to the southern oscillation phenomenon. So you get years of terrific rain when there's a lot of vegetation production, and the birds breed a huge amount. And then you get other years with complete drought, and some of these droughts can last up to 2 or 3 years. And then many of the birds die, and who survive and who die and why will give us a natural selection event. And by looking very carefully at each individual bird, taking their measurements, and as we did, we took a little blood sample as well from each bird, we're able to find out, and also recording all the food that they have available for them. Then you understand who died and why. And this gives you a natural selection event with a knowing, we had to work this out, how heritable the things like body size and beak size and shape were, how these characteristics that enabled them to survive were passed on to the next generation.
Since you spent, almost half a century going back and forth over there, when was the first time you first saw something? Where was it? Yeah, here it is. Here it is. We've had this natural selection event. Oh my goodness! Look at this. Is the first kind of when was that? When did you see that?
That was 1977. Yeah. So that was actually, we went in 1973, first of all. So that was, yes, a few years later, but we actually saw this. But it was perfect timing, really, because by that time, and we also had graduate students we had on the island. There was two of them actually, Peter Berg and Loreen Ratcliffe were there as well. and then some other graduate students that came on. But so they would be on the island sometimes, and then we would be on for 3 to 4 months each year. And so that was an event that we saw then. And the very good thing about that is that we had actually caught and banded and measured the birds, individuals, before then. So we knew who it was who survived because they were all individually banded, and we knew who died, and we knew all the measurements. So it was actually perfect timing. And that was the first time. And then we saw, yes, and then again, we had a 2.5-year drought, which was amazing, but that wasn't until 2003 to 2005.
I was going to say, when was the last time you saw something or whatever?
Well, that was the last time that we saw that in great detail, and where we were able to really measure everything and see exactly what was going on. And then all this time, well, from 1988 onwards, but unfortunately not before then, we had a tiny little blood sample. The nice thing about birds is the red blood cells, unlike humans, are nucleated. So you just need the tiniest drop of blood to get a lot of DNA out of it. And we were able to, from every bird that we had measured and banded, and we were able to look at the genetic profile. And now, in collaboration with our geneticists in Uppsala, Leif Andersson and his group in Uppsala, we're able to do these huge long reads and really find out the genetic factors, and then go back and look at our data and find out exactly in the survivors what genetic factors they had, which is really exciting. Yeah.
I remember I had a conversation with, I've actually had 2 conversations with him, Jonathan Losos.
Oh, yes.
Yes, yeah, he's lovely. He's wonderful.
He's fantastic. Yes.
He wrote, both his books are great. More recent ones, the one on
Did you read the one on cats?
I love that book. We had a nice conversation about it. It was a great book. The one before that was I think the best, kind of popular science book on convergent evolution with was Improbable Destinies, I think.
Yes.
Anyways, but I'm curious for your thoughts, because we talked about this a lot in the first conversation I had with him. But there's something there's something really special about islands that really give you a snapshot into how evolution works, both convergent evolution and just kind of otherwise. What do you think about this? I mean, again, having spent so much time, not only on some islands, but some pretty special islands that have not been tainted by a lot of things. What do you see about the power that islands, especially the Galapagos Islands, have for helping us understand adaptation and selection and sexual selection and all these things? What do you make of it?
Well, I think especially small islands, and Jonathan has also worked on some very small islands. The small islands, you're able to actually follow individuals. We're able to follow individual finches. There's something about small islands in that that you can almost get to know the island so well. You know all the plants, the names of the plants, which plants are acting as food for the finches and that sort of thing. And then it's almost like a microcosm that you are seeing, and it's almost something that you can have in your hand and grasp what is actually going on and why it is going on in that way, which you can't in larger places. In the Galapagos, it's a very simple environment. There aren't many, especially on Daphne, and also on Henebesa, there are very few species of plants. If you see a new species of plant, suddenly you come across it, you know that it's an invasive species that's just come in or something like this, because you know the island so well. And also living on the island with your study animal, you almost you almost feel you can understand. You can almost think like them. You understand why they're doing certain things.
Mm.
Yeah.
I can remember my when I was in the Galapagos, it really felt like I was in their home, right? Like I felt that more there with the animals because there's not really any quote unquote predators there on the islands, but it really felt like I was in their home. Like that's what it feels like, and so
Yes,
I can
exactly.
only.
You are the intruder. Yes.
That's right. That's right. So I can't imagine how you feel as like a frequent visitor for many many years with many of the inhabitants there, and that has to be just a special connection there, of course.
Yes,
Um,
but you're absolutely true. You feel you're the intruder. You're
mhm,
intruding into
mhm.
their world. Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting feeling.
Mm.
So you spend decades and decades doing this work, genetic work, and work on evolution. Um, and how did you guys decide to? I know you had said you're not you're retired, but you're not retired from still doing research. But I guess kind of retirement from all of the things you had been doing of some sort. Um, how did you guys both decide to do that at the same time? When to kind of slow down of sorts of how much work you're putting out? When did you know that moment? I guess. And then, you write about it in the book, you got to probably travel more in some ways when you were retired. You go to all, basically almost every continent, seeing all these indigenous groups and seeing different cultures and, all these things in Asia and back in Europe and in South America and Australia. So yeah, how did you know when to kind of retire and slow down?
Well, yes, we retired when I think we were 72, 73.
Mm,
And because you can, well, as you know, you can go on, you don't have to retire. But we decided it was quite a difficult decision. Because I actually love teaching, and it would be giving up teaching. But we were also very conscious that there were two of us, and if we retired, then there would be two vacant slots for young people coming in. And I'm so glad we actually did retire, because now in our department, they got young people, and not only that, but half of the people are now, there's a 50% of the people on the faculty are women.
nice.
So they were able to get some really top young people, both men and women. But so that was a good feeling that we were able to release
Mm,
two professors. Peter, I don't have this problem, but Peter has a problem of hearing, and
mm,
his hearing was going, and so. He liked to actually, in the classes that he was teaching, he liked to have a discussion with the students, and he was finding that difficulty in hearing their answers.
mm, mm,
So he thought, well, this is the time that he had to retire. And so we decided to actually retire at the same time. And as I say, also for this reason that we would be releasing two slots for young people. Since then, we've been lucky enough to keep on doing research work and collaborate. And also, we kept on going down to the Galapagos for some years after that. And then we had collaboration with all these geneticists. And so because of the collaboration, I think, and because of putting together the genetics with all our work on the island, we've been invited and are still being invited to give lots of talks
mm,
all over the world. It stopped a little bit. It was all on Zoom doing in COVID, but
mm,
now it was back again. And then when we had the opportunity to go to other countries, we would, because we didn't have to teach, we could actually stay on for a week or so and
mm.
explore the country.
That's cool.
And so this was thrilling,
Mm,
and then I found this particularly, well, both of us found this really exciting and interesting, and I got really quite involved in following up some of the ideas I had about the human history and that sort of thing in the different And we were lucky enough to see quite a lot of indigenous people too.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
that was also exciting. Yeah.
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 It's kind of the best of both worlds in a lot of ways.
Yes, it is absolutely. So I feel that we've both been extremely fortunate and very lucky. Yeah.
When was the last time you went to the Galapagos?
The last time was just before COVID.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay. So it's about 5 years.
Yes. And before that, a couple of years before that, we went down with our collaborators in Sweden and took down a nanopore sequencer. So we were doing research with them on actually San Cristobal Island and then sequencing right there on the island.
Cool.
So that was fun. Yes. So we've been back, and then I think one of these people, well, a couple of these people, and one of our ex-students too, will probably follow up the work maybe in a slightly different way, but they'll still. And there are quite a number of people actually doing research on the Galapagos, so there's still people doing.
Do you think you'll go back or no?
Love to.
Yeah, that has to be.
I don't know if you remember seeing Daphne. It's quite.
No, I didn't get to go. I know it's not far from one of the main islands. It's kind of right next to it.
Not far from Baltra, and I think you probably landed on Baltra, and you can.
Yeah.
But you have to jump on it, and I'm pretty sure when we went back last time, I had no problem doing that, but I think I could still do it.
That's great.
I mean, how well they were like somebody who will be getting on for 90, getting on to the island. I'm not sure. Anyway, it was. I would love to go back, and I'd actually, even if it's just to set up. Some of the people who are taking over from us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, that would be really, really wonderful.
Yeah.
So I guess the last question I have is you've had so many wonderful experiences, with your work and your personal life. I guess what is it that you want to say, I guess, to a whole generation of scientists and young people studying, biology and evolution and science generally, about how we can preserve biodiverse habitats, how we can take care of many species and just the planet as a whole. I guess, what is it that you most want people to hear, I guess, from you?
Yes. I mean, I'm very concerned, as everybody is, about this, because really we have the knowledge to actually save the planet. We do have that knowledge. And things can happen. One of the themes, I think, through the book is to show how fast change can occur.
Yeah.
And this was one of the things I was interested in when we were retired, and when I was going around the different continents, is to look into the history. And I was impressed by how rapidly change can occur if you have basically it comes down to a benevolent dictator who is tolerant with other cultures, tolerance between people, bringing creative ideas together, and following this through. And change can be extraordinarily rapid. And then the question is how, and of course, just recently we've been so inundated with fake news and things like this. How do you have a culture which actually allows you to, if you like, a benevolent dictator can, the culture that allows a benevolent dictator to actually change things to very fast. And I think it all comes down, well, a lot of it comes down, I won't say all of anything, but a lot of it comes down to education. And I've been hugely impressed with the Finnish education in the way that they have, even from kindergarten onwards, right up through looking at statistics and mathematics. They basically train people to recognize fake information. But one of the things, so I would like to see a change in the education system, more along the lines of the Finnish system, which I think is wonderful because it actually encourages creativity, individual creativity. And I go into this Finnish education quite a bit in the book. The other thing for science, I think we've shown how change can occur, and that it's very important to maintain what we have left of our natural environment, and to not just a single species, but a whole community of species, because integration between closely related species is very important for maintaining the genetic variation on which selection can then act and change can happen. So that's one thing. And then the other is that in science, in our field of science, often more money goes to genetics now than it does to field work. And I think it's extremely important. Both are extremely important. You have the genetics, you really want to know what is happening in the wild. You want to interpret the genetics properly. It can't just be interpreted in the lab.
Yeah.
And the field work is enormously valuable to also understand the genetic underpinning. So I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. No, that's super wonderful. I mean, I think that, for someone that has been doing this for a while, I think your wisdom is much needed. So that's wonderful that you're giving us these kinds of ideas of where we should put some of our value or our importance on some things to unlock other things for people to find and explore about the natural world. So it's all very important. Rosemary, this was such a privilege and an honor to talk with you about your life and your work. So thank you for being open to writing about it and talking about it with me. I really enjoyed the conversation. You're such a delight, and you're so brilliant. So I'm really, really grateful for you to have the conversation with me today. So big thanks.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, and I've enjoyed many of your podcasts. So.
You're very kind. I appreciate that. So big thanks. Thank you.